antes de que Estados Unidos invadiera nuestras costas, y después de 123 años de coloniaje, la mayoría de la población no tiene dominio efectivo del inglés. El nuestro no es un problema de reivindicación de derechos civiles individuales, es uno del derecho colectivo a la libre determinación de un pueblo colonizado. Además, todos y todas sabemos que el 1522, según declaraciones del liderato senatorial de ambos partidos, está destinado al fracaso, lo que lo convierte en una vía segura hacia, otra vez, la inacción congresional y hacia la continuación del régimen colonial. De fundamental importancia para el éxito del 2070 es que el Congreso insista en el requisito indispensable de que las opciones de estatus estén fuera de la cláusula territorial. El Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño le da la bienvenida al HR 2070 y esperamos contribuir con enmiendas que optimicen su eficacia. Su aprobación representaría para ustedes un regreso a los principios que una vez guiaron a la nación, que fue la primera en enarbolar la bandera de la libertad y la independencia en América. Son mis palabras, señor presidente.
Gracias. Now let me turn the time over to the interpreter.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, at the outset, it is important to put this hearing in its right context. We are here today because of the refusal by the United States to exercise its responsibility towards Puerto Rico, the territory it claimed 123 years ago as a war booty. The continuance of the U.S. colonial domination of our nation, notwithstanding the many occasions and diverse methods by which we have demanded an end to colonialism, contravenes both legal and historical mandates, provoking a situation that is oppressive for us and shameful for the United States. Regarding the status problem, Puerto Rico has been the victim and the United States the perpetrator. The only serious initiative undertaken by Congress to promote the exercise of the right to self-determination by the Puerto Rican people was the consideration between 1898 and 1991 of the Johnston Bill. Though it was defeated, there were three important outcomes that deserve careful examination by this committee. The impossibility, recently ratified by the three government branches of the U.S. government, to upgrade the existing colonial status to a truly bilateral relation amongst equals. The need to elaborate a transition plan for independence. And finally, the resistance to make an offer of statehood to a Caribbean and Latin American nation in which the vast majority of the population, even those who favor annexation, do not think of themselves as Americans. And many of those that promote statehood wield as the main reason for their political aspiration their ambition to perpetuate the financial dependence on federal funds. Of the two bills before this committee, only H.R. 2070 provides the means to avoid a similar dead end as the Johnston Bill. In contrast with H.R. 1522, H.R. 2070 contains the elements that make it a potentially effective instrument to promote decolonization by enabling the Congressional Bilateral Negotiating Committee included in the bill to answer the essential question as to what Congress is really willing to offer Puerto Rico. Contrary to the case of Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico is financially bankrupt as a result of the failure of the colonial relationship. Neither is there an overwhelming support for statehood in Puerto Rico. On the contrary, we are deeply divided as to our future relation with the United States. More importantly, the national identity of the national identity of the inhabitants of Washington, D.C. is unmistakably American, and in this critical respect, indistinguishable from the residents of other states. That is not the case of Puerto Rico. Our nationality was forged and established before the U.S. invasion. and even after 123 years of colonialism, most of the population does not have a working knowledge of the English language. Ours is not the struggle for full individual civil rights. It is one for the collective right to self-determination of a colonized nation. Furthermore, we are all aware that the leadership of both parties in the U.S. Senate have anticipated that H.R. 1522 is destined to failure, which leads as another path to congressional inaction and to the continuation of the colonialism. Finally, we must emphasize that for H.R. 2070 to be successful, it is critically important that Congress be unyielding in its requirement that the status options be outside the territorial clause. The Puerto Rican Independence Party welcomes H.R. 2070 and looks forward to proposing modifications to the bill in order to improve its efficacy. The enactment of H.R. 2070 would represent a much-needed return to the principles that once guided the nation that first raised the flag for freedom and independence in America.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And let me now turn to our last witness. Let me recognize the Honorable Manuel Natal, President, Citizens Victory Movement. Mr. Natal, the time is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva and members of the committee. My name is Manuel Natal Albelo. I'm a former member of Puerto Rico's House of Representatives, and as of last Sunday, I serve as General Coordinator of Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, a recently created, people-powered, community-oriented, progressive political party in Puerto Rico. I must stress from the outset that Puerto Rico has been a colony of the United States since 1898 and legally defined as an unincorporated territory, a possession but not part of the United States, under the plenary powers of Congress. Although Congress has reorganized the territorial government over the years, the colonial nature of the relationship has remained unchanged. Since 1898, Congress has never, let me repeat that again, never consulted the Puerto Rican people in a binding plebiscite or referendum on whether to retain the present status, become independent, or a state of the Union. Having retained its plenary powers, Congress should assume its responsibility for a territory it claims as a possession. Yet, it has avoided doing so for 123 years. Today, we have an opportunity to change that. This committee, and eventually Congress, is presented with a unique choice between two paths. The first path is one that we have traveled many times before. Plebiscites or referenda promulgated unilaterally and without consensus by a political party on the island, devoid of informed public deliberation and usually designed to be slanted towards the outcome favored by the ruling party. The final results of which have lacked democratic legitimacy, whether the prevailing option receives 97% of the votes or 0% of the votes. That path of exclusion and subordination is currently represented by H.R. 1522. The second path is one that, although it has been historically promoted by diverse and well-respected groups in Puerto Rico, it has never been supported by Congress or by any previous administration in Puerto Rico. A binding self-determination process in which all non-colonial, non-territorial options can compete on a level playing field, in which the people of Puerto Rico get to cast an informed vote and Congress must act upon the will of the majority. That path of inclusion and empowerment is currently represented by H.R. 27. We chose the latter and urge Congress to do the same. We, a political movement that promotes real change in all aspects of our lives as Puerto Ricans, including ending the colonial relationship. We, the only political movement in Puerto Rico that has elected officials from all three non-colonial, non-territorial options. That is statehood, independence, and some form of free association. How have we managed to achieve what the two-party system in Puerto Rico has not in more than 70 years by focusing on finding common ground and not on how we can cancel each other's effort on the status question. In this particular case, we have focused on building a fair and inclusive process rather than trying to predetermine the outcome. This is why we propose and support the Constitutional Status Convention, Asamblea Constitucional de Estatus, as the best means for decolonizing Puerto Rico. Puerto Rican, yes, are US citizens, but we're also a nation, a people with our own identity and culture under US colonial rule since 1898. Sometimes these facts generate confusion. Should Puerto Rican aspire to become a state of the Union? Should they become independent? Should they become a sovereignly, freely associating state with the United States? A democratic response from the United States Congress should be that is for them, not us to decide. The first step in that process shall be done by ourselves, los puertorriqueños y las puertorriqueñas, in a true binding exercise of self-determination. We are ready to do our part. It's your moral responsibility to fulfill yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and let me thank the witnesses for their testimony. Thank the panel, and we'll go to questions now. The committee, under Committee Rule 3D, then imposes a 5 limit on the questions by members, with the noted exception that I made regarding the sponsor of the legislation, Mr. Soto, who didn't have an opportunity at the beginning to speak to his legislation. The chair reminds members that under the chair's right of recognition, as described in Committee Rule 3, will provide some reasonable additional time for any member that has a question for Senator Maria de Lourdes to account for the interpreter. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish. On the majority side, that process is going to be by seniority. Minority side is the names that were submitted to us by the minority in that sequence. Let me now, I will forego at this point my initial questioning and turn to and recognize Mr. Costa, and I will alternate back and forth for his 5 minutes. Mr. Costa, the time is yours. Mr. Costa? Let me now recognize, in order of seniority, the next member, Vice Chair of Insular Affairs as well, Mr. Sablan. Sir, time is yours.
Chairman Grijalva, thank you very much. And I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I've learned enough over the years that I will stay out of Puerto Rico's political status issues. I will stay away from this until when I have no choice but to cast the voting committee. I yield back. Thank you.
Let me now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Westerman. The floor is yours. Mr. Westerman, you're recognized. Let me continue and recognize, and we'll go back to Mr. Westerman when he connects with us. Let me now recognize the gentleman, Mr. Heiss, for your time. Sir, you're recognized. As recommended by the minority, let me now recognize Ms. Gonzalez Colon for her 5 minutes. You're recognized, madam.
Jennifer, I think you're muted.
Ms. Gonzalez, recognize Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to say thank you again to all witnesses that are here with us today. And I want to say thank you to the Governor of Puerto Rico for traveling to DC. And my first question is going to be for him. Many people are saying that statehood votes in November last year were not enough, or the percentage was not big enough to establish the vote for the decision of the people of the island. And I just want to point out that 52% of the vote was for statehood, which is an absolute majority, and just 47% against. It's like almost 5% of difference. And if we compare that to the results of the general elections in the United States, where President Biden got elected by 51% versus 46%, I think is less than 4.4%. That means that for some people, elections in the United States were a landslide or a bigger margin, but that margins are not good enough for the people of Puerto Rico to establish their support for statehood. So I think that's something that the governor of Puerto Rico, as the only one elected to pursue the will of the island, and I just need to say it on the record, the status option of statehood got more votes than any elected official in the island. Governor and I, mayors and state legislators. So that's something that even between party lines on the island, statehood got more votes than anyone else. Governor, do you think the percentage to support statehood and the mandate that you do have, the request of the state?
Well, hello and welcome back from our break, of course. Welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, and over break, yet again, a person of color is killed by police. Yet again, we are summoned to say their name: Daunte Wright, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Yes, we must see them always, and we must say their names always. But here is something else we must not look away from.
Get out of the car!
What's going on?
Get out of the car now!
What's going on?
What's going on is you're fixing to ride the lightning, son.
Get out the car!
You received an order. Obey it.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Can I?
Yeah, you should be. Get out. Back up.
Whoa, hold on.
Daniel.
What's going? Hold on. My door.
AO4 OC just deployed.
Get out of the car and get on the ground now. You're gonna get it again.
I don't even want to reach my seat.
Take your seatbelt off and get out of the car.
That was a traffic stop last December in Windsor, Virginia. The uniformed soldier at the wheel of that SUV is Lieutenant Karen Nazario. Those are Windsor police officers Joe Gutierrez and Daniel Crocker, demanding that Lieutenant Nazario submit to them. Gutierrez is the one you hear warning Lieutenant Nazario that he will, quote, ride the lightning. And then he assaults Lieutenant Nazario with pepper spray. This is policing in America today. This is racist, authoritarian, and wildly, needlessly violent. We keep being told that the deaths of George Floyd or of Daunte Wright or of so many others are the result of individual failures or circumstances. The prosecution of Derek Chauvin has presented a string of senior police witnesses, to say that Chauvin broke the rules. He broke the rules as he murdered George Floyd. And in nearby Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, the police chief has already said that it was a tragic mistake and he stepped down today, and it was caused by one of his officers who stepped down yesterday, who fatally shot Daunte Wright when she thought she was tasering him. There will always be individual stories, and individuals, of course, must be held to account according to circumstances in each case. But at the same time, we must not miss the larger story here. To fully understand the death of George Floyd or Daunte Wright, we need to see that their deaths were the logical end result of the way policing works in America, a culture of needless force, and organized systemic racism. All of it right there to see that video of Lieutenant Nazario driving while Black and while Hispanic. Lieutenant Nazario was in uniform, an active duty member in the US Army. But not even that was enough to calm Officer Gutierrez, who described this as a, quote, high-risk traffic stop. Watching this video is so easy to understand why Daunte Wright is dead, why George Floyd is dead, why Breonna Taylor is dead, why Eric Garner is dead. Indeed, what's harder to understand is how Lieutenant Nazario is actually still alive and able to bring the lawsuit that has now forced the dismissal of officers Gutierrez and Crocker. And we should, of course, be grateful that Lieutenant Nazario is alive and that he was able to bring this lawsuit, because it has given us a window to see the system of policing that so many others have not survived, like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Daunte Wright. Saying their names is important, but to honor their names, we have to do more. I'm so sick of saying this. The system must change. Pushing individual officers, as important as that is, will not get the job done. Bringing Derek Chauvin and Kim Potter to justice is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need the kind of transformational policing that LBJ championed on civil rights and voting rights, something that could not be done back then. That's what they said. It was too much. But now we have Democratic lawmakers in every single city, mayors, who are unwilling or incapable of challenging the police unions that are right-wing, that endorsed and organized for Donald Trump. If Democrats, and many of them are progressives, cannot stand up to the police unions, and the best that they can do is call for some folks to be fired or name streets after BLM, what is it going to take? So we need Joe Biden to lead, and for all of us to find the levers of change and lean on them so hard that traffic stops like the one that Lieutenant Nazario survived stop happening in America. It's too much. When are our lawmakers that are supposed to be on our side going to have the courage to make systemic change? How many lives, how many mothers and fathers and sons and daughters need to be needlessly murdered for literally nothing? What is it going to take? So we have to keep pressuring those who have the ability to oversee, who are in charge of the police forces in America, and of course the president, to do something sweeping and systemic, because we had the largest uprising in America last year. And if that didn't do it, we have to start looking at power and saying, what is it going to take? What did it take for LBJ to sign civil rights and voting legislation? All right, we have a great show today. I am so glad to be back here live. And Dorsey is back. Thank you to everybody for dealing with us yesterday. We had some YouTube glitches, and I am not sophisticated enough to understand how that stuff works. So we are going to rebook everybody. We had an amazing show talking about Amazon and some great panelists, but they will be back, we promise. But today we have an awesome show. We are going to be talking about universities and the control that they have over cities across America. And later, we're going to be talking to Alex Kotch and Jordan Zakarin about today's news and some of Alex's latest stories. We will be right back right after this break. Thanks. All right, you guys, you've heard me talk about Sunset Lake CBD. It is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD, their products, directly from their farm, their independent farm, to your door. Sunset Lake CBD has literally something for everybody. So many different products that we all love. Tinctures, gummies, salves, and coffee to help with stress, aches, and pains. It was actually an original dairy farm in Vermont. It was the Ben & Jerry's, like that Ben & Jerry's farm, and they decided to diversify and grow premium hemp there. When you are a supporter, a customer of Sunset Lake CBD, you are supporting sustainable agriculture that enhances rural communities and creates meaningful employment in the community. We're talking about the opposite of Monsanto. These are small farms with a supportive infrastructure. Their minimum wage is $15 an hour. The employees own the majority of the company. And on top of all that, they decided they believe in independent media like our show and like the David Pakman show. And of course, the Majority Report, that's who they choose to support and advertise with, which is really, really kind. I talk about them all the time. I have a new tincture. I have used it. I was on vacation last week and I had some like sleeping issues. I had a lot of pain. I was doing yoga. I was hiking. Dorsey, I know you like to use this product, but I got to just say, like, I haven't told everybody this. I got really sick during my vacation for 3 days. And like, I was rejecting everything. And even my joints were starting to hurt me. So I used the salve on my joints, like on my chest in particular. It was a horrible thing. I don't even want to tell you how bad my sickness was. And I hadn't used it for anything like that. And I was like, thank God I brought my Sunset Lake CBD and that I was able to fly with it.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. I went on vacation also and forgot to bring mine with me, but luckily there was some medicinal options in the area we were at. But when we came home, we were greeted with a box of fresh CBD gummies from Sunset Lake, and they changed their bottle. So we were excited about that. And it seems like they're a bit juicier and sourer. Like the taste is even better than before. I hate to sound like that, but it was like, these are like my favorite products in the house, other than the stuff
legal.
That is now legal in
New you can
York.
Say it out loud.
Yeah. So anyway, when I smoke that kind of stuff, I put the keef from Sunset Lake on there.
Yes.
And it really kind of chills me out when I smoke some of the anxiety-inducing strains that are out there. My partner seems to like those, and I don't. So I have to put a little bit on there. She doesn't mind when the keef is on there, and it's really calming for me. I love it.
This might be too much information, but so I live in Astoria, and there's a lot of hookah bars in Astoria, and I was going a lot over the summer because I don't have a balcony, and I wanted to be outside like everybody else, during COVID in New York. And then I was like, I'm spending so much money on hookah. What if I buy it? So I went and I bought a hookah. I didn't realize how unhealthy they were, so now I know. But I just to put the keef in there instead. It was so good. It was so good. My cousin and I tried it. We're like, this is really amazing. We should do a video on this. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the taste is actually really good too. Like if you like the taste of your strain that you're smoking, it doesn't really interfere with it. It's like, it's nice and mellow.
Well, awesome. All right. So guys, we love Sunset Lake CBD. We're not lying. Joshua Con Russell asked me recently because I was recommending it, and he was like, wait, you actually use it? I was like, no, really, like we're obsessed with it. I'm not using the gummies anymore. I love them, but I'm trying not to eat so much sugar. They're really delicious though. So, and I also eat like 5 at a time, and then I'm really mellow. But definitely you go check out their products. You can go to sunsetlakecbd.com. There's a promo code. It's NOMI, N-O-M-I, and you get 20% off your entire order at sunsetlakecbd.com. The promo code is NOMI, N-O-M-I, for 20% off your order. You can check out all sorts of things. There's salves, there's tinctures, there's gummies, there's fudge, there's coffee that my mom loves. Oh my God. And I've got my whole family hooked on it now. And so we're doing like family orders. Well, they're doing family orders. I have my own orders where they're all, sharing products together. I don't know what's going on. It's like I've created it's great. It's a great thing. It chills my parents out a little bit. So anyways, we'll be right back with our guests. Thanks. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. So Davarian Baldwin is the author of Shadow of the Ivory Tower, How Universities Are Plundering Our Cities. He's a leading urbanist, historian, and cultural critic. He is the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies and founding director of Smart Cities Lab at Trinity College. I am so interested in this topic, living in New York and just seeing how much of New York is owned by universities and driving us crazy with our rent. So I think about it all the time and I'm like, and here we are. Thank you so much for joining us, Davarian.
Thanks for so much having me. I appreciate it.
I want to start off by just asking, why don't we talk about this more? I mean, the majority of Americans live in cities, and it is really shifting the way, I mean, everything from housing to policing, as you're going to talk about, so much more. It's shifting the ways. It's like a secret story that, I don't know. Why?
Well, it's a story hiding in plain sight, as we like to say, because we still want to hold on to the belief that higher education is primarily a schoolhouse, a space for teaching. And especially in the last 30 years, it's become so much more as we've moved our economy from a more industrial mass production to what we call the knowledge economy. And because of that, the research and the work that's done at the university has become the driving engine of today's capitalism. And we haven't shifted our minds to adjust to that reality.
So that's interesting because, right away, I before we get into the nitty gritty of how these universities are shifting and recreating cities. How much of the research that's coming out of universities is actually driven by capitalism? It's not just affecting capitalism, but, I'm just thinking of like all the environmental studies that were paid for by oil and gas industry. And, I'm sure there's a million other examples out there.
That's a great question. I don't have a percentage number, but I do know that starting in the 1980s with the passing of the Bayh-Dole Act, which basically said that for all the time before that, most of the research produced at universities it still is federally produced. It's federally sponsored, excuse me. And before the 1980, all that work had to be maintained in the public domain. It couldn't be sold. But a group of universities got together in 1979, 1980 and lobbied to make policy that would then say that even though we're getting this free sponsored research, once it's produced, we can package it, privatize it, and sell it on the market in exchange for royalties. And that ramped up what we call the technology transfer departments in universities all over the country, especially, like MIT, Stanford, Chicago, schools like that. But almost every school now, every research school has a technology transfer division. And that's a huge driver of income for universities, especially as state budgets have shrunken and their contributions to universities, both public and private, because private schools get money too from the state, has shrunk. So they've tried to figure out different ways to maximize for-profit interest to bring money back to campuses to produce and to sustain themselves and to produce profit.
Okay, so let's start with public universities.
Yeah.
How is a public university shaping, like let's say Cuny in New York, the City University of New York.
Right.
How does a school like Cuny shape New York City? Is it as much a player as like some of the other universities in New York?
Yeah, some of the point about, Cuny is a perfect example and a horrible example because its mandate from the beginning was to teach and educate the people. That was its original mandate. And it's been trying to do that, but because of the declining contributions from the state, it's had to also venture into these for-profit schemes. But it's much lower down on the totem pole as compared to an NYU, a Columbia, even a Fordham in New York. So with Fordham's campus now at Lincoln Center, that's a part of this new kind of reorientation and reorganization of cities. So CUNY is trying to hold on. And right now there's been calls in the State House in New York State to bring back free tuition, not create it, bring it back as we all should know that it once had. Free tuition and open admissions. But it has not been able to exempt itself from turning its research into profit to counter the declining contributions from the state.
Okay, so let's compare NYU, for instance.
Yes.
I think a lot of New Yorkers are used to hearing the stories of these amazing apartments that NYU professors have in like Washington Square Park, which just for those of you who don't know is like, you know, unachievable, the very expensive apartments. Right. And there are these, I've been to some of them, like, how do you live here? There's like a balcony, there's a terrace, there's like a view of, so I mean, that's the stuff that we see, but how much does NYU play a role in just how, like, the shape of New York right now? Like what's housing, police, etc.
People call NYU a real estate company that just happens to teach classes. And, you know, Greenwich Village, for people that I know, has gone through some changes. It used to be known as kind of a refuge for bohemians and hippies, but now it's one of the most expensive zip codes in the country. And so the battle between NYU and Greenwich Village, as NYU has attempted to expand and move outwards into that area and encroach, not just Washington Square Park, Washington Square Village, Greenwich Village, also Midtown, also Brooklyn downtown with its new tech campus, also NYU Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. It's become, it's franchised itself like a McDonald's. And so in these basically land deals, which they never call them that, they call them, you know, they say, because we're crunched for space. They tell these woeful stories about, you know, dance practices, dance recitals in hallways, and professors teaching, you know, having office hours in rooms the size of closets. And I went to NYU for graduate school, so I remember space crunches and having whole office hours at coffee shops, but it never compared to the scale of their response to those conditions for what they're doing. And so, you know, when NYU, where the area was a bohemian encampment, there were these land battles between, you know, the great Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. And she was able to hold off some of the development that was going to happen when he wanted to run a highway right through the village, right after the BQE development. So that's the old story. So we hold on to those stories, but it's a very different place. But the one thing that locals want to hold on to or maintain is that some of the arrangements, some of the kinds of agreements that were held, that you're not going to build so high in NYU. You're not going to be able to build over here. You're not going to be able to put educational buildings or commercial development here. Those have recently been broken with NYU's 2031 plan. That's its bicentennial. There's a huge plan to expand as much square footage as the height of the Empire State Building all throughout the village. You're already starting to see dormitories that are totally out of scale with the kind of low-level design that people want to maintain with the village. So people are upset, not so much with how many blocks are taken over, but with the scale of what NYU is able to do. And in the name of simply, as John Sexton, the former president, say, as goes NYU, goes New York City. So also the arrangements that these presidents have with mayors and administrators and financiers, that their board of trustees is packed with some of the titans of construction companies and finance and capital. And so when they develop when they go into these development deals, these are basically arrangements to put money into the pockets of the people that are on these boards.
Conflict of interest much?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my God. So let's play devil's advocate here for a second. All right, great. I'm a New Yorker. I understand real estate is king. It drives everything. Real estate and police. Literally, I mean, it's the third rail of Democratic Party politics. Right. You know, you don't touch people's real estate donors, and you don't touch the police unions, because it's just progressive city as we are, even the most progressive lawmakers don't want to deal with it. With that being said, at least it's education. It's not building, these empty glass towers that are being filled with billionaire and investment money, where they want to plant their who knows what money to keep it outside of a bank and at least have it in real estate, driving up the cost of living for everybody else in New York who's trying to survive. So it's not that. I
know, but the problem is it is that. And I'm sure you know this, but that's a great setup. But let's be clear, as you said, devil's advocate, I want to be clear up front. Colleges and universities, they bring ideas and people together and they generate new innovations. Can't take that away from them, right? But because as research and development in universities has become this pipeline for private industry and finance and computer science and pharmaceuticals and even military defense weaponry, that work is being done in university laboratories. And so the real rub is that because universities, both public and private, are considered nonprofits based on the tax code of the 501c3, their property is tax exempt. So because these laboratories and what have become these knowledge communities, these mixture of labs and of high income, high scale housing in glass and steel buildings, as you pointed out, this is the new university. And these innovation districts and these knowledge communities, because they are slated for educational purposes, even though the research there is going to produce royalties that are for profit, they remain tax exempt. And on top of that, they remain tax exempt while their presence raises the property values for land all around them. Most urban universities are in working class or poor communities of color or white poor communities. So as these university developments raise up property values, the fixed incomes of these individuals in these neighborhoods, their housing costs go up. The cost of rental properties go up. And then to add another insult to injury, universities don't pay into property taxes, but property taxes are what pay for secondary schools, are what pay for trash removal, snow removal. Think about Texas, the electrical grid. So property taxes pay for that. So residents are now realizing that there's a direct through line from the property taxes that universities don't pay and the crumbling infrastructure that's not being taken care of in their neighborhoods. And they're saying universities pay your fair share. So both universities and private industries are recognizing the power of institutions of higher education as tax shelters. Talk about a public school. Arizona State University actually houses the biggest private development in the state of Arizona, a State Farm Insurance regional headquarters, and that development is tax exempt because it's on university land. And so what happens is that the university said, oh, state, you're not going to give us any money or less money? Okay, our land is tax exempt. We're going to lease out our land to the highest bidder, State Farm. They're going to be tax exempt. Then we're going to charge them a lower rate, take that money and do whatever we want to with it without democratic or state oversight. So one of the most significant things they did was they lured Herm Edwards, the former coach of the New York Jets, to come out to Tempe, Arizona and coach their college football team, and they built a new stadium. That's what they did in the name of the public good, right? And the state can't do anything about it because it's under the cover of this tax exemption.
So just to be clear for everybody, when we say tax exempt, we mean federal.
We mean their property taxes.
Oh, you lost your
sorry.
For a second. Go ahead.
Are we back?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, sorry about that. So we're talking about their municipal property taxes. This is money that goes directly to the city, right? Now, let's be clear. There are other ways in which university money is tax exempt. Endowment. So Harvard has a $40 billion endowment, tax exempt, right? Contribution. So when a private company like Google or State Farm or Bombardier or General Motors wants to conduct research at a university, that money is tax exempt. The money that would normally have to charge for research and development in the private sector, they get equally as talented graduate students to do that work, give them money for their stipends. And so they basically have tax exempt free research and development that's going to do the same work that will be done in the private sector. So there are these ranges of ways in which universities have found ways to sell themselves out to the highest bidder because of this tax exemption, the various ways in which they become tax shelters. And the city part is important because this is all being done on property tax exempt land, these for-profit deals. And that's why it's vitally important for cities where these universities sit. We're paying the cost. The value is being extracted from the public dollars that should go to these cities.
So what about these like for-profit schools? You mentioned ASU, and I immediately thought of all the for-profit schools that were Phoenix, exactly. Some of them are online. Some of them have real estate holdings. I don't know if they do inline, classes in person. I know that Obama cracked down on them a few years ago, but do they have a stake in any of this? I mean, I've driven through Phoenix many times, and I can't tell you how many buildings I see with ASU on them. And I've been in other countries where ASU has shown up in buildings, but ASU is a public university. But there's other ones like Phoenix University, whatever these online schools are. And some of them are religious. And
Right. A couple of years ago, there was a crackdown on their financial arrangements precisely because of the ways in which they were using these benefits and these tax designations as a way to shield or profit or mine contracts and relationships with governments, with state power. So it's not as egregious as it once was. I don't focus on those for-profit universities in my work, because I just found that the reality of the nonprofit universities and their in kind of incursions was egregious enough, and without any scrutiny on the part of the communities where they occupy, or the government entities that help facilitate these arrangements. And so that for me was enough on its own, but there definitely could be, and there has been some work in the scholarship on the for-profit universities. I think there was a great study being done by a woman who worked for one of them, and she wrote a book about being coming from the inside. So there is some of that work. That's not my area of focus, but it's very much a part. There's a range. This is a part of a range, and I guess the bigger story here is to what degree do these entities that we think of as just teaching classes all play a role in facilitating the new economy? That's the great takeaway.
That's exactly it. It's a new economy that's very confusing to folks. It's very like you're saying, like hidden in tax laws, and so the policing side. Yeah, okay. We start off the show talking about needing to, what is it going to take for Democratic lawmakers to step up and hold police accountable, systemically, not just, rename streets and have police chiefs and officers fired, but what is it going to take for the institution to shift the way LBJ finally signed civil rights? Like, what is it going to take? Mm-hmm. And then I hear about this and I'm like, oh my God, this runs so deep. Mm-hmm. in these cities that Democratic lawmakers control. So can you explain what's happening?
Yeah, so there's a very, right before our eyes, there's a very real way, this is to be very clear, colleges and universities are the biggest landholders, employers, healthcare providers, and policing agents in cities and college towns all across the country. We're not talking about just Columbus, Ohio, or Madison, Wisconsin, or Gainesville, Florida, but New York, Chicago, LA, Atlanta, St. Louis, right? Major cities. So university police forces, both public and private, are an occupying force, and their primary goal, they hide under the specter of public safety, offering a public good, especially in very violence-torn neighborhoods like on the south side of Chicago or in Baltimore or West Philadelphia. The argument is that, well, Johns Hopkins is there, UPenn is there. Their police force expanding out these neighborhoods is doing the public good, it's public safety. But their goal, they don't do that well. Their real goal is to secure neighborhood blocks to make, let's be honest, primarily white families feel secure about their children going to school in these predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods, and to signal safety by having police on every corner. And they're there to demonstrate the safety of the brand of the entity of the university. And they're there to protect, as these knowledge communities, as these research and development entities expand out into cities, they're there to provide protection and make a place and remake city blocks for university expansion. They police not just the land, they police behavior, they police interactions. And the most important thing about them, especially the private universities, is they're not even, they have public authority. So they're armed, most of them are armed. They have public authority or public jurisdiction, and they are not subjected to Freedom of Information Act laws.
Whoa. Okay, so let's break this down for a second.
Yeah, sure.
They're armed.
Yes, most of them, like 90% of them are armed, 90%.
Who's paying for their arms?
Well, if it's a private school, it's murky, but primarily the university and their endowment. Okay. But if it's a public university, it's state, it's public money.
Who's training them? Are these officers that are off-duty regular officers? Like, what are the standards here? It's all good.
In some places, it's state, and they have to get state training, right? But in other times, they're going to get contracting. They're off-duty police officers, as you pointed out. In some places, so there's a range of policing mechanisms. There's public safety that are unarmed. There are fully state licensed separate private security force, like University of Chicago Police Department, University of Cincinnati Police Department, University of California. The whole California system has their own separate police force. So it's a range of arrangements, which is what sometimes it makes it difficult to track and market. But the point here is that in most cases, even public universities, when it comes to who they answer to, the suggestion is they're engaging in public safety, but they primarily answer to the administration and the board of trustees and the donors.
So I'm sure there have been instances, just like with the regular police, where things have gone terribly wrong.
Yes, so we can raise the name of Samuel DuBose in Cincinnati in 2015. We can raise the name of Stephanie Washington in New Haven in 2019. We could raise the name of Paul Washington in Portland in 2018. These are people that were either shot or killed by campus police off campus. So not on campus, off campus. So miles away from campus over things. So Sam DuBose in 2015. So thinking about right now, Daunte Wright, he was over air freshener. Sammy DuBose was killed over a license plate. Right.
Over a license plate.
Right.
Something that they don't even have jurisdiction. They're not traffic cops.
But they do have jurisdiction because they're sanctioned by the state. They have the same power as the Cincinnati police or whatever. They're trained and certified by state entities. They have the jurisdiction the same, in most cases, the same as the city cops themselves.
But jurisdiction, okay, but
and arrest powers.
They're not traffic cops though.
Right. That's right. They're not.
So why does a license plate even matter?
Because their primary job is to signal safety and surveillance in these mixed racial and class neighborhoods. So it's kind of like what we used to call broken windows policing.
Yeah.
If you police the small things, the argument is that you will be able to make a signal and people that are doing real crimes will prevent them. They're still operating under that modus operandi of broken windows policing. It's ramping up again, that if we over police on these small things, it will deter big policing. And so, but what you're seeing all over, whether it's an air freshener or license plate, is that Black and brown folks are being killed in these stops. And it's not exempted from city cops, it's campus cops as well.
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought broken windows. That policy supposedly ended in New York City under Mayor de Blasio. This is a Bloomberg log, like the stop and frisk broken windows. With that being said, okay, so that policy with the police force in New York has ended. Has it also ended for the campus police? Like, do they have a different set of standards that they have to follow?
Broken windows policing might have ended in policy, in official policy, but it still exerts itself in practice. Because even with the formal ending of broken windows policing, discretion about what is compliance, what is resisting arrest, what is furtive movement, all these decisions are still given to the individual police officer, the discretion of the police officer. So on campuses and beyond campuses, broken taillights, loud music, expired plates, aggressive movement, all become the general mechanism for policing. And this is why you are still seeing these deaths, even with policy reforms, when the power is placed into the hands of individual police officers who have microaggressions, who have implicit bias, who can engage, who are protected by various kinds of immunity. There won't be reforms or changes. I mean, one of the ironies is that right now in the streets, people have been calling for defunding the police, which means shifting funds away from armed police stops to things like trauma care, to domestic violence therapy, to unarmed police stops. And when I talked to Senator Washington, Mary Washington in Baltimore, she was like, the university could be the perfect place to model this kind of real public safety as compared to aggressive policing. You have these major medical and health and public health centers. Why couldn't you pair an unarmed police officer with a public health safety worker? Where else but a university could this work being done? But they're actually doing the opposite. They're bringing in more cops. So not de Blasio, but Bloomberg before him, when he was enforcing and ramping up stop and frisk, he was also going to his alma mater, Johns Hopkins, to support and give billions of dollars to the Baltimore PD and Johns Hopkins to support their creation of an armed private police force. And Mary Helen Washington said, this is akin to putting a Vatican City in the middle of Baltimore.
Right, that is very
because they would hold no jurisdiction. They would have no accountability to local government, state government, only to the board of trustees and to the administration.
It's like an autonomous zone
many
for them.
Republics, right? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say it's like an autonomous zone, but you said
Yeah.
it even better. It's their own tax exempt little, I mean, forget about the camp. Speaking of Michael Bloomberg, he's very well aware of Caribbean islands where he doesn't have to pay taxes. He used to go there every weekend when he was mayor, just so everybody knows. He would take his little private jet.
Oh, yeah.
As bad as de Blasio is, just remember how bad Bloomberg
That's
was.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways, so this is there any sort of, is anybody speaking up? You mentioned this lawmaker, Washington in Baltimore, but you know, what's happening? Are people speaking up? Is there any legislation?
So after this, people were already were using the words like reparations at the University of Chicago because of a long history that the university, other universities, you know, there's been this huge racial reckoning around, you know, white supremacy. So whether it be universities' ties to slavery or the seizure of indigenous lands. But I recently wrote a piece in Washington Post about the fact that, you know, the reckoning goes far beyond slavery, that we can talk about universities upholding racially restrictive covenants when it came to segregated housing in the 20s. They were the friendly face of urban renewal in the 50s and 60s, demolishing whole Black and brown communities to make way for their laboratories to keep the so-called urban crisis at bay. We can there's a long history of social movement organizing. Columbia tried to build a gym in the middle of Morningside Park, and activists and residents charged Jim Crow, GYM Crow, so very inventive, and they actually stopped that from happening. So current activism after the summer of 2020 with George Floyd, people say, well, policing in general, but what about campus policing? And furthermore, how does campus policing open a door into the larger idea that these universities are not just these ivory towers floating above our cities? They're driving the economy and the governance and the policing of our entire cities. That when there's a labor dispute on a campus, it's not just a campus problem, it's a city problem because they're employing most of the city, particularly low wage labor. And so people are beginning to see the connections between what is happening on a campus and its kind of reverberations for the city at large. And so you have a major May 3rd day of action spearheaded by Cops Off Campus, which was started in California, but has become nationwide, saying we need cops off campus. People, university workers are gonna not work that day. And there's gonna be a whole month of May where there's gonna be teach-ins and instruction about that. At University of Pennsylvania, people are charging PEN for pilots. So our city schools are crumbling, and there's direct correlation between that and the taxes that UPenn doesn't pay. So Penn is not kicking in some dollars, but they're calling it a gift, which I'm sure they were counseled for by their lawyers to call it a gift and not a contribution or responsibility. In New Haven, protesters, there was a 600-car stoppage where they stopped traffic in downtown New Haven last July, saying, Yale, pay your fair share. Right now in Massachusetts, there is legislation going through the State House that's saying we have this voluntary program with universities in Boston where they have to pay a percentage of what they would normally pay if their properties were properly assessed. We want to but none of you are actually paying even the small percentage we're asking you to pay. So now there's some legislation going through the State House saying, let's make that mandatory. So there are things that are going on right now, even in terms of if you were just watching March Madness with basketball, there was a campaign with athletes having a hashtag not NCAA property. An unspoken part of the story is that, you know, in the month of March, universities under the guise of amateurism make $900 million in 1 month. And none of that money goes to the athletes, which are primarily Black and brown. None of that money goes to the neighborhoods where the stadiums sit. And none of that money goes to the communities that produce these athletes. So part is also saying that the labor issue, the healthcare issue, the policing elements, the land grab elements, also the athletic revenue elements, all must be understood as a part of a new understanding, a new vision of how today's economy works with the university at the center and Black and brown and poor white communities as primarily the target for the extraction of the wealth for the whole thing to run. And we need to understand that now, because it's washing, as you live in New York, it's washing over cities, and we're still blinded by this idea that, well, they just teach classes or they produce pure research. And they are the driving force of our economies, and we don't see it.
Davarian Baldwin, this is so fascinating. I have 9,000 more questions for you, but we don't have enough time. You can check out Davarian's book. It's such an interesting conversation. It's called In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, how universities are plundering our cities. Remember, most Americans live in cities. And even if it's not in cities, there's smaller cities. And, it's not just New York, New Haven, it's not just Ivory Tower. It's ASU, it's U of A, it's Kentucky, it's Oklahoma, everywhere. Really, it's about the new economy. Fascinating conversation, Davarian. I would love to have you back on to continue this conversation. And thank you for doing this extraordinarily detailed and thoughtful work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And let's do it again. I'm happy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. We will be right back with Jordan Zakarin and Alex Kotch to talk about today's news and Alex's latest story on Alec. Yes. Remember that? Be right back. All right, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I'm so excited. It's been a while. I'm a little rusty with the panels. Jordan Zakarin with a fresh haircut, I think, and a different location. Look at that. Jordan Zakarin runs the Progressives Everywhere newsletter. And Alex Kotch, old friend Alex Kotch. He's an investigative reporter with Exposed by the Center for Media and Democracy. And he's the co-founder of a nonprofit news app called Opt Out. Also the co-host of the Gilded Age podcast. And this is the thing I didn't know about, a member of the Freelance Solidarity Project. I love that. So I want to start off, guys, talking about Alex's story. I think this is something Jordan's very tapped into as well. It's a great story for today. Alex, you have reported recently on Alec. Remember Alec? Does everybody remember what that is? Maybe for the kids who didn't know Alec when it first launched, we can do a little refresher. Alex, what's Alec, and why? What are they doing right now to suppress voting in other states? Battlegrounds.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on. Big fan of yours, big fan of the show, and also big fan of Jordan. So, yeah, really pleased to be on here. Alec is not me. Alec is the American Legislative Exchange Council. So I like to call it a corporate bill mill. It's essentially a national organization that unites state lawmakers from around the country. Almost all of them are Republican, with business lobbyists. And so they write model legislation kind of behind closed doors at these conferences that they hold in places like that, that then the lawmakers can bring back to their home states and introduce in the legislatures. So a lot of what they do is, pro-business, kind of anti-regulation, kind of typical kind of conservative pro-business interest-based laws. But more lately, they've been getting back into voter suppression, coordinating kind of some voter suppression efforts, which they tried to stay away from for a few years, but they're back at it.
Back at it because, as Tucker Carlson likes to remind everybody every night, the demographics are shifting, and that's the goal for the Democrats. What's going on? Kamala Harris is going to Guatemala to go round up a bunch of immigrants to go vote for her in battleground states. Is that their strategy here? Is that what they're thinking?
I mean, look, the whole right wing today, whether it's the politicians on the state and federal level, the media sphere, it is all based in propaganda at this point. We've gone full, I'm sure you talk about it all the time on this show, but we've gone full propaganda mode in every element, I think, of our society. So certainly voting and voter fraud specifically is a major propaganda point for the right. So whether they're making outrageous claims that the Democrats want millions and millions of non-citizens to vote, or they are fear-mongering about non-existent voter fraud that is statistically completely unimportant. They are basically using this propaganda campaign to scare voters and to justify kind of Trumpian justifications for these extreme voter suppression bills, which we're seeing. Over 360 bills have been introduced in the states this session alone, this year.
Whoa. Okay, Jordan, you're monitoring this stuff too, I know. I mean, how likely, let's just remind folks, many, if not most of our legislatures in this country are controlled by Republicans. And even in states like New York, just 2 years ago, the Republicans controlled the Senate because a bunch of Democrats were willing to sell their souls to go get a bigger office and, I don't know, free drinks with somebody. It was a real low cost, let's just say that, for democracy. But they've really fundamentally, these Alec, the Koch brothers, different interests have really put so much energy into taking over these legislatures, while the Democrats simultaneously have just been see ya, local politics. So I ask you, are these bills, that's a lot of bills, and is there a chance that any, if not a good chunk of them, get passed?
Yeah, I mean, you look at what happened with I thought corporations were against voter suppression, right? That's what we were told. Obviously, it's the funny thing is that they were not funding these wild right-wing lunatics. They would not be having put out these statements and feel upset about all the tweets they're getting. A lot of these things do have a shot of passing. We saw what happened in Georgia. Those things that passed. Florida has been trying to do the same. They want to do this crazy signature matching program that is just incredibly difficult for people. I mean, my signature doesn't look the same. So basically what they want to do is if you send an absentee ballot, and Florida has a lot of vote by mail, and anyone can do it there, you have to have the exact same signature on every single thing. And they would signature match, and they will throw out ballots, and they can select where they decide to throw out. They decide to audit ballots and see where they're going to throw them out from, as it so often happens. And, they threw out as a concession, they threw out the law model in Georgia where you couldn't give food or water to people in line. That one was a big headliner, almost like a side note, but it was sounded so egregious that they threw that one out. They're going to push that through. Arizona is, their redistricting commission. They're supposed to be independent now.
It's independent, yeah.
Well, not so much anymore. They have a Republican or someone who has given a lot of money to conservatives now overseeing it, and a Republican staffer is going to be the guide to it. So this is happening everywhere, and And that's why I kind of go crazy every single day that we're not seeing the S1 or some version of it passed, the For the People Act, because we are one House Democratic death. We are one sickness from a senator away from not being able to do it at all. They act like these things can just, pass maybe down the line when they can get Joe Manchin to say yes. But we are, probably a few months away from every single day that they don't do it is a day where these laws put in by Republicans who are funded by ALEC, who are funded by the Koch brothers, who very much like Republicans, big business is not attacking Republicans, that they are getting closer and closer to clinching these, clinching these voter suppression methods and putting them in place for a decade or more.
So this has been a long time in the making, and it's such a big topic. And I think what you just said, Jordan, like you're reminding everybody how close it is. I mean, yes, Biden won the presidency by the largest number ever in history, but Donald Trump came just below that with the second largest number in history. And once again, in the fashion of Obama era politics, we got annihilated locally. It's sometimes I think our conversations on the left, like we get into these little boxes where we're having conversations about really innovative, progressive things and like what we should be pushing forward. And we're completely forgetting like the current map and how we're never going to have any of these things on the table. Or if we do, it's going to be in 25 years when it's financially something that is an advantage for, the next Boehner to invest in, which we'll get to in a second. So, I mean, what is it going to take? Like, you're both really thoughtful people. I mean, how do we have to frame these conversations on the left? Like, how do we organize around this? Instead of, I mean, I love the idea of challenging bad Democrats, but there's a lot of weak Republicans that we could be going after right now and channeling our energy into in a way that the DCCC just like clearly isn't very good at. I mean, what is it going to take?
I mean, first of all, saving redistricting, right? If we get into the point where Republicans fill gerrymander even more, there's going to be so few swing districts. They're going to take over power without even winning an election. They are going to just get rid of Democratic, let's say in Tennessee, the Justice Democrats, they launch a primary challenger to Jim Cooper. His district may not even exist if gerrymandering continues.
I've noticed this. They just launched another one to somebody who they think same exact thing. I'm so glad that you brought that up, like and strategically.
And so these things matter. Of course, we want good Democrats, but we need to, you see, ALEC is investing in state and local lawmakers. That's the whole thing. ALEC is pointing out people who are getting money and they're in the state legislature. They are in the state Senate. They are local officials getting money from ALEC, getting bills from ALEC. And the left has been trying to do that. Unfortunately, everyone who watches MSNBC and that whole crew and the National Democratic Party doesn't seem too interested in helping to build that infrastructure. There are people that want to do it. I talk with them every single day. There are people that are great people who are doing it, great people who are, busting their butts to do it. But unless the National Party and unless, the people who are online who are hashtag blue no matter who want to invest in that, there is no equivalent as the businesses that will do that on the right, the way ALEC does. So it has to be people doing it and it has to be the party wanting to do it. And I mean, we saw, state parties have their own vested interests. So until that happens, these things are just going to keep happening.
And Alex, I mean, simultaneously, this has all sort of come about as unions have been under extraordinary attack, as the Democratic Party over the last 40 years, as I know you know very well, has completely, pretty much disassociated itself in like, it used to be intertwined with unions and it's not anymore. It's like unions can throw some checks and, maybe we'll support the Democratic Party's candidates, but does that have something to do with it? I mean, we're like, you've got business and the Koch brothers and ALEC and meanwhile, there's no interest in going local, which, how do you do this otherwise? How do you fight it?
I mean, that's a very good point about labor. I mean, first of all, ALEC is extremely anti-labor for obvious reasons. The Koch Industries is a member of ALEC, for example, and they're run by Charles Koch, who's one of the biggest opponents to organized labor the country's ever seen. But and I want to clarify my article. We don't have proof that ALEC wrote these bills, but we just don't know yet. And there's a lot of correlation. I'll put it that way. 100 ALEC lawmakers have proposed these bills around the country. So a lot of the bills are very similar. So there's a lot of correlation. We're just waiting to find some evidence. But it does seem like there's a lot of overlap. ALEC has a secret working group they formed in the last couple of years, full of a bunch of Trumpists and people from the Heritage Foundation and stuff for kind of like strategizing for ways to suppress the vote and to gerrymander to help Republicans. So, and what Jordan was saying about redistricting and gerrymandering. I mean, it's the state level lawmakers who write the districts for the state and for the federal and for Congress, for the U.S. House. And so, getting it's just as important to elect people who are democracy minded at the state level as it is at the federal level. And I'm not sure why Joe Biden at this point hasn't put the hammer down on Joe Manchin and said, look, or told Schumer, listen, you need to threaten Joe Manchin with being a member of the caucus, or at least with his position as the head of the Senate Energy Committee. What's he going to do? Go to the Republican side and caucus with the Trumpists? I don't think he will. He's a Democrat. But going back to labor, labor, basically a lot of things happen when organized labor is strong in this country. One is higher wages, much bigger middle class, and much more prosperity. Another thing is progressive policy has a better shot if organized labor is stronger and thus engaging in politics at a greater degree. So I think that, and I know you've done segments on this before, about the power of organized labor and how progressives need to bring them back into the fold after kind of being ostracized by a bunch of the neoliberal Democrats. So yeah, I think that any kind of increase in organized labor is good, not just for everyone's personal finances and sort of well-being, but also for progressive, actual democratic policy to have a chance.
I mean, I'm sure this is on plenty applications, questionnaires that labor provides to candidates, like, do you support ALEC? I know that for a fact. And there are unions who prioritize fighting ALEC. We just don't hear about it enough. We don't hear candidates going out there and saying, whether they're in Congress or not, or local, we need to fight ALEC. So maybe we start to say that more often. Maybe hosts like ourselves, when we have candidates on, say, would you fight ALEC? I mean, how would you do it? What are your plans? Because it has sort of operated in the shadows, and we don't, not enough people report on it, like yourself.
Yeah, and I do just want to note that, yeah, I mean, where I work, the Center for Media and Democracy is one of the only outlets that really focuses heavily on ALEC, at least on a national level. And it's not a very sexy topic. It's not going to make a bunch of CNN headlines or political headlines, but it's incredibly important to know what they're doing, what the business leaders from these companies that are members of ALEC are doing, and what they're pushing out to the states. And so a lot of it has to be some kind of sleuthing that we do to figure out what's going on, and then we report on it. And so I'm really glad that you're bringing it to the attention of your viewers. And you can read the article exposed by cmd.org. But yeah, so I think one component of this is the media, is covering more stuff, covering stuff like ALEC that, Don Weiner and I wrote this piece the other day, that is not often reported on, that people do need to know, especially organizers and other politicians who are not affiliated with it. They should be fully aware of kind of the power that it has and what they do.
Absolutely. And it ties into Democratic Party politics. It ties into how many seats we have. It ties into everything. So, these are the structural issues that, like you said, are not sexy, but, the IDC wasn't sexy. The DNC reform wasn't sexy. Right. A lot of this stuff wasn't sexy until enough people realized what was going on. I want to shift gears a little bit, because somebody who I'm sure has a good relation, or had a good relationship with ALEC, John Boehner, in some way or form, or the people who funded ALEC or behind ALEC. John Boehner, former Speaker of the House, loves a good cigar, loves a good drink. He is now one of the leading advocates for legalizing marijuana. Let's play that clip.
You decided to throw your weight behind the legalizing of cannabis industry. Do you think that the federal government needs to pass a law that would basically take that off of the drug list so that it could be more in line with what's happening in the states?
Yeah, we've got now some 37, 38 states who've legalized cannabis in some form. The federal government says it's illegal. It's time for the federal government to look at these 37, 38 states, a vast majority of them, who've legalized this, and take some action to basically get out of the way.
I'm still a just say no kid. So I've watched this debate, and your embrace of it with a little bit of skepticism. How am I wrong?
Well, I won't say I embrace it. But, when you're in politics, as long as I do, you learn to listen to your constituents. And over the years, I was in Congress, and I saw state after state after state begin to legalize cannabis. I began to take notice, because obviously the people were speaking. And by the time I left office, I thought to myself, listen, I'd rather have a glass of wine and smoke a cigarette. But if somebody wants to smoke a joint, what do I really care? But once I got to looking at some of the research about the benefits of cannabis for kids with seizures, for soldiers that have chronic pain or PTSD, I began to believe there's a place for this product in American society. And I don't go out and promote it, but I do I serve on the board of a cannabis company. I believe in what the industry is doing. And the American people want to smuggle a joint, let them do it.
Hey, well, you mentioned wine.
All right. I think we just lost Jordan, and we're gonna wait for him to come back. But are we good? Okay. I'll start with you, Alex. I mean, this is hi. It's almost like he was in office for like most of his life. Could he have done something like before he was on the board of? I mean, this is just like so transactional. He says it on TV. He's like, yeah, I'm making some money doing this, and F you Black and brown communities who we've locked up for the last several decades for barely any weed. But here we go. Now I'm ready to make some money off. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, isn't he working for the weed industry? So you have to take what he says with a major grain of salt. But you look, at least, I mean, he's not actually in Congress. He can't actually vote on anything or write a bill at this point. But at least now he is, despite his major financial conflict of interest, he is on the right side of the issue, at least for now. But I will say, I mean, it's hard to find someone more opposed to marijuana than Joe Biden. I mean, they fired people for past marijuana use. Honestly, according to their,
I know one of them. Before it happened, they reached out. They said, I just didn't get a job with the Biden administration because I admitted to smoking weed. And I was like, what? Hang on. And then, of course, the story came out and so many other people had the same story. This is insane. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I'm curious. I mean, was this kind of was this unexpected for these people? And was it like many years earlier? Was it any time of your life that you'd used it? I mean, I
don't know all the details, but I do know that the person was young and they were asked, have you ever smoked marijuana? And given the world that we're in right now, I think it was like, sure, I've smoked marijuana. It's not like that would have been magnified or unveiled in any way. It's not like, okay, if Joe Biden hires someone who smoked weed before in his life or admits to smoking weed, suddenly it means that he is, as the federal government, proposing legalizing marijuana. It's not like Joe Biden's suddenly like, I am for legalizing marijuana, which essentially means the federal government is for, I don't know. I don't understand what the justification was on it, but go ahead.
Yeah, it just seems kind of ridiculous. I mean, the time that we're living in, it's a much less harmful substance than alcohol. And a bunch of prescription drugs, obviously. It seems absurd. But it is nice that the states are legalizing, and even our state of New York finally did it. And there's one reason why Cuomo relented after blocking it for many years.
What
Probably
was that,
because
Alex?
I can't. Has he been in the news lately? I'm trying to remember. I mean, there's actually two different scandals, of course. The nursing home scandal. And then because of all the brave women who came out and spoke about how Cuomo sexually harassed and abused them. So he had his back up against the wall. He had to do something popular. So I guess he encouraged us and kind of claimed almost some ownership of it, which was absurd. But I mean, that's kind of how he operates.
Yeah, he's been doing that since for the IDC. He's been doing that forever. When Cynthia Nixon proposed something, he would just mimic it. And I mean, that's just Cuomo's modus operandi. So, okay, we're waiting for Jordan. Just so everybody knows, Jordan had a little bit of a Wi-Fi issue. Some construction's happening in his building. We were just told, so he's trying to get back on. So, in the meantime, I was gone on vacation for a little over a week, and I didn't have the pleasure of reporting on Matt Gaetz. So, will you just spare me a little bit so we can have a little bit of a conversation about Matt Gaetz? So, House Minority Leader Steve Scalise, has weighed in on the allegations against Matt Gaetz. Hey, Jordan's back. So you're on mute.
Verizon heard me talking about Alec and they got mad and cut me off.
And with that. All right. So we're talking about Matt Gaetz because I didn't have the opportunity to really discuss Matt Gaetz because I was on break, and just give it to me, please. House Minority Leader Steve Scalise has now weighed in on the Matt Gaetz gate. Is that what we're calling it? Is that the updated gate? Yeah. Let's show that.
Sounds about right.
Well, we've heard a lot of stories. I mean, obviously I've read the media reports, but there's been nothing that we've seen yet from the Department of Justice. If something's going on, obviously we'll find out about it. Right now it's hard to speculate on rumors, but if something really formal happened from justice, we would of course react and take action.
All right. I mean, I love how Republicans operate. They're like, oh yeah, literally, nothing matters. Nothing. I think on the scale, like this is how I've kind of pictured it. Progressives will cancel you for like winking at the wrong person in 1975, and then the Democrats, like centrists, are just like, rape me, doesn't matter. And then Republicans just don't care. They just don't care. Like literally, they could have like multiple lawsuits and investigations, and they just don't care. If this is how accountability works, where do we see our future going? I mean,
I will say one thing. I like Marco Rubio's response. He said he hadn't heard much of it. I'm sure he had no idea who Jill Greenberg was down in Florida. I'm sure he had no connections with any of those people. I'm sure that Marco Rubio he hadn't heard about any of it. This is all news to him. I'm sure just nothing familiar. I mean, the thing is, Matt Gaetz is in a very red district. He could be, any other Republican would win that district. And again, I'll just keep hitting it over and over again. There is no accountability if they cannot be challenged in their districts if they gerrymander. Florida's not super gerrymandered, but all these Republicans, they only come out against people if they feel the pressure and they feel the shame and there's a chance it could hurt them. When there's literally no chance that any of these people are likely to be hurt, they are not going to take a stand. And that's because they're soulless and they're hacks and they have no shame. But now that shame doesn't work, they've eliminated shame through money, through the entire ecosystem of like untruths, their entire own information ecosystem that just ignores it. Fox News hasn't touched the Matt Gaetz thing. Why would they be worried? They're not going to worry about a primary. I mean, very basically to say, hey, this guy, maybe we don't like him as much as now. But until they are challenged, until they live in an ecosystem or an information system where there is, a chance that they could lose because they're not only going after the most far right partisan voters. Why would they come out, I guess, if they have no souls? That's the calculation they make. Why would they do anything?
Well, what I don't understand is, and we saw this play out with Trump during the primary in 2016, the evangelicals. I mean, when he started to do well with evangelicals better than like Ted Cruz, who is one, I don't understand how like that just goes to the side. Like it's not an issue anymore. Like we don't care about morals. We only care about Democrats' morals. We only care about like that woman over there. I mean, I have family members who became evangelical, and it's every time I go visit them in Virginia, it's like a logic. I'm like, well, I don't understand this. This means this. Okay, so that you care about, but you don't care about that. But you only care about that when it's a Democrat. I'm so confused. It's a web. But I mean, Alex, why do the evangelicals really care about these issues? Like, you think that all the people cared about Pizzagate would care about Gatesgate?
Right. I mean, everything's partisan now. I can't speak for evangelicals, but white evangelicals are one of the most, if not the most right-wing group of voters in the entire country, which says a lot because we have a very right-wing Republican Party right now. So they're on the extreme right, which is troubling in itself. But yeah, look who was president for the last 4 years. I mean, if he was Teflon, then like no one's going to care about a couple, some stuff that Matt Gaetz did. I mean, I guess even if it involves child trafficking, sex trafficking, which is extremely serious and I think could result in jail time. But yeah, I'm surprised Scalise didn't just go and say the magic 2 words that the right loves, which is cancel culture. Everything now, we're in this kind of post-truth Trumpian world where everyone kind of invents, in QAnon world, where everyone invents their own truths. And if they don't like something, they just say it's fake news or propaganda. And if they like something and it happens to be not true, that doesn't really seem to bother them. But everything is cancel culture, whether there's merit or not. And there's no there's no middle ground, And so I think we're just in one of the dumbest political eras that in a long time. Just incredible stupidity of a lot of different people, and we have these powerful people who are exploiting that. And they're just as stupid as anyone else. So, I mean, I'm just to say this is like a mind-boggling time. And it's not surprising that Matt Gaetz is honestly, he's probably going to be okay. Unless
you think even if it's illegal?
I mean, if he gets convicted of something, I think there's probably no option other than to resign or to have the caucus, kick him out. But after Trump, it's like, Anything kind of goes on the right. And we have Jewish space laser woman Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. I mean, like, Paul Gosar, who's spoke at a white nationalist conference very recently. I mean, like, there are no standards. There are no standards.
And they've created this narrative that they are always under attack. They, of course, control most governments throughout the country, and they, up until this past year, up until now, controlled the entire federal government. Basically, they still have all their judges in there. They have all big business, but they are always under attack. And so when you create that narrative, they can say, "Hey, look, these people are framing me. These people are trying to cancel me. These people are trying to set us up. They are trying to attack your freedoms and your values." And so it's, of course, an alternate reality. It's certainly not white rich people who are under attack in this country. I'll say that much. But that's the framing they create. And so everything then they can be on the defensive about everything. And they can say, no, that's not true. We're just being set up. And so it's this victim culture as well. It's this far right wing belief that they are, it's white fragility. And it's this belief that they are the victims, that they are under attack. And then, just like anything else, Matt Gaetz is being framed. Matt Gaetz is having horrible things said about him. The FBI is trying to make his dad wear a wire. It's all these bizarre things. Yeah.
Which is also, by the way, but to a point, I mean, if this story is what it seems to be turning out to be, there's a point where Matt Gaetz' lawyer is going to have to say, "Yo, shut up. Like, this isn't looking good." Some of the aspects of the story might be true, but you're like, it's not looking good. And that's what I think is very odd is for Steve Scalise or anybody in leadership or anybody in the Republican Party, frankly, to be sticking their neck out for somebody who clearly has an investigation that could go in many different directions. At least just bite your tongue. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm too old school. All right, Alex Kotch, Jordan Zakarin, so fun having you on. Come back, Alex. We'd love to have you on. Let us know your next story. Really good work. And we will see you next week, Jordan.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, we had a lot more stories we wanted to get to today, but we'll get to them tomorrow. We promise. We have some good stuff. But I want to thank you all for being so patient with us the last couple of days. I know on last week we had some special interviews. Thank you to everybody who gave the shout outs for the interviews on the Majority Report yesterday. They were great. If you haven't checked out those special interviews, they are in the archive on YouTube. And I believe that we've released them in other forms as well. But definitely check out those one-on-one interviews. Really interesting. And yeah, book club. I think many of you have your books right now, and we have special book club interviews up on Patreon right now for our book club members. You can become a book club member / the Nomiki Show. And something just happened to my microphone. Oh, sorry about that, guys. I think I pressed a button. So go check out the book club if you can. And we will be putting some of those little teasers of the book club up as well on YouTube for others to see. All right, we got some shout outs here. Ken M, thank you for the love. Pete from Oakland, welcome back, Nomiki. We missed you terribly during the break. I hope you feel re-energized. Love from the Bay. It was an interesting vacation. I'll talk about it probably a little bit tomorrow. On one hand, it was rejuvenating. On the other hand, I got sick. I was in a very remote place that required a lot of physical work to get to. So all I can say is that my thighs are in great shape and I am cleansed in all ways. Kowalski from Nebraska. Tuesday was ruined. Take this bribe. Never again. Thank you, Kowalski. Kyler Asado. The officer who shot Daunte Wright was on the force for 26 years, police union chief and a police trainer. But sure, she shot him on accident. Well, she's no longer got a job. This is Revolution Pod. There is a push to get rid of police at the University of California system. Professor Dylan Rodriguez out of UC Riverside was talking about this. Oh, I'll go check that out. Thank you for sharing that. Everybody else, Harvey K, Professor Harvey K, he has been mixing it up in the live chat. He texted he was going to be listening. Thank you, Professor Harvey K. Can't wait to catch up with you. And thank you to Mitty Docs and Mario for working those algorithms. And of course, our moderators on YouTube, Bob C, Chokin, The Orb, and Chuck Diesel. And over at Twitch, Dorian Sapiens, Difficult Truth, Nug Wrangler, and our means, as well as Nightbot, Dorsey's favorite non-real bot. I guess all bots are not real. Over at Twitch, thank you guys for keeping the chat rooms troll-free. We will be back tomorrow, Thursday, same time, same place, 3 p.m., Twitch and YouTube, and of course, every day on Patreon. Go join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. It is how we can do the show. All right, everybody, stay in solidarity.